I'd like to ask Todd and members of the panel to come up and join me, and as they're coming up, I'm going to introduce our moderator, and we will continue to move forward with our program. This is a great panel discussion on the global trade winds. Most of you have heard the moderator referred to this morning in various conversations from the previous governors. I think it's probably sufficient for you to know that Todd Haymore has been able to transcend the Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, has been a real public servant. He should be nominated for some ambassadorship in the future, but I would tell you that Todd has been a real public servant, having served as Commissioner of Agriculture and then Secretary of Commerce and Trade as well. And worked for Governor Kane, Governor McAuliffe and Bob McDonnell, and has but really spent his previous years working with a couple of Fortune 1000 companies and managing external communications. He is a true ambassador for Virginia. When he left the administration, I want to congratulate him on leading a new position at the law firm of Hunton, Andrews, and Kurth. I want to get that name right. I want to say Hunton Williams, but it's Hunton, Andrews, Kurth. And he is their Managing Director of Global Economic Development, Commerce, and Government Relations. Please join me in welcoming Todd. Thank him for his public service. He'll introduce the panel.
Barry, thank you. I appreciate the kind introduction, and thank you for your leadership of the chamber and everything that you do. I also want to commend you for the panel that was on earlier with the three governors. That was fascinating, and having had the opportunity to work for two of the three of them, it was great to be back with them and hear their positions, so thank you. I also note this was the first time, I think, in history where Terry McAuliffe has not referred to you as the greatest Secretary of Commerce and Trade in Virginia history in front of me, so that was always a treat to hear Governor McAuliffe do that. Just as we get into the panel and introduce and let the panelists introduce themselves even more so, just a few thoughts on global trade and the important role that global trade plays to the Virginia economy. Governor Allen used the word beneficial several times in his remarks, and he's absolutely right. It is so beneficial. I realize I'm preaching to the choir, but my grandmother used to say sometimes the choir needs to be preached to. So that's a little bit of that going on this morning, and just an incredible economic generator. And I've been fascinated by trade from as far back as I can remember, growing up in Danville, with the heart and soul of the Virginia tobacco industry right there, and knowing the flags in front of the old Dibble Brothers facility and all these countries around the world. And I can remember getting out a globe and looking at where this tobacco that was going through Southside Virginia was going into the global marketplace. And then having the opportunity to work for a Congressman, L.F. Payne, when he was on the trade subcommittee, when NAFTA was going through, and my time in the private sector with the tobacco companies and then with the governors. It's been just an incredible journey to see, again, the important role that trade does play. And you think about it, to the U.S. economy, over $2.3 trillion in exports last year, $2.9 trillion in imports. Imports get knocked around sometimes, but I think everybody in the room understands the important role that imports play in the economy as well, because they're usually converted into something or utilized into something, and it goes rippling effect through the economy. 95%, it's been touched several times, 95% of the world's customers live outside of the United States of America, and so that makes it all the more important for Virginia and the nation as a whole to be actively involved in global trade. Brookings Institute did a study a couple of years ago that said that 85% of global growth, economic growth, was going to take place outside the United States of America over the next 5 to 6 years. Even more important to continue on the push there. In Virginia, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and Barry, and I think others may have mentioned it already, 30% of the economic growth in Virginia from 2009 to 2014 was tied to trade. And my guess is when they update that study at some point, you're going to see those numbers continue to rise as we are in a global economy. The Virginia Port Authority, and John Reinhart's going to touch on this, I think I'm not sure, John, you all are still using it or not, but Catalyst for Commerce, the slogan.
Yes, sir.
It's a great brand. It's so true. And the things that are going on as it relates to the port. And when you live and operate in a globalized economy, you need a world-class port, and we are so very fortunate to have a world-class port, and John's leadership there second to none. $73 billion imports, exports in 2017. So again, you can think about that. You don't have to be a mathematician or have an MBA to understand the ripple effect there. And obviously, we have room to grow. All the governors talked about getting the port deeper, wider, and John, safer too as well. That's so much important role, and also facilitating more economic opportunities. So you get it. You get it. Virginia is doing incredibly well. My good friend Paul Grossman's here. Paul, I know you've been shouted out a couple of times with the things that your team at VEDP to push, help these private sector companies, great public-private partnership, my old colleagues at the Department of Agriculture and international marketing. Virginia is really, really fortunate to have such an active pro-trade group of people, starting with the governor, all the way through the cabinet, all the way through to the agencies that are impacted. And we're blessed. Make no mistake about it. I have seen other states that look to Virginia and understand that we are doing far better than they are, and there's a lot of envy. Paul knows that probably as well as anyone. So we've got to keep it going. And as we think about this panel now, with the global headwinds, global winds, right now I think we're probably being pushed along by some tailwinds, which is what you want in a growing economy. A growing global economy, particularly as the governors all referenced, the recession, the Great Recession, the impacts that we felt there. Unfortunately, and you're talking to someone who has worked for both parties, so I consider myself a big old squishy, middle-of-the-road person. We have a president, and we have a presidential administration that operates with a great deal of uncertainty, a great deal of uniqueness, and all that translates into confusion in a lot of places. And just in the less than 2 years, we've had with full withdrawal from the TPP. We've had the threat of blowing up NAFTA, obviously renegotiated, updated, tweaked, whatever you want to call it. We had the threat of blowing up the Korean-U.S. free trade agreement. Lots of things out there, but there have been some successes as well. So that's what we're going to talk about, and this is what this panel is all about. What do we do with these wins that impact global trade? So I'm going to introduce very briefly the panel, then I'm going to get them to introduce themselves and say a little bit more about themselves and the companies they work for. So, and I guess I'll start maybe at the far end and just come right back around. Takashi Masuda, Senior Vice President, North America, HR, Marketing and Yield Management for Ocean Network Express, one of the world's largest global shipping companies. And John Reinhart, who needs no introduction, right there, the CEO and Executive Director of the Virginia Port Authority. Next to him is Cornelia Steinert, the Senior Manager of International Trade for Canon, Virginia Incorporated, one of the world's top manufacturers of imaging and optical products. And then Herb Frerichs. Herb is standing in for, as you probably have seen in your program, Dick Willey, the president of Perdue AgriBusiness, had to stay back in Maryland, at Rat Hole State, Maryland. Anyway, I'm sorry, I just did a Terry McCullough phone. I apologize. To conduct some business. Herb is the general counsel for Perdue and knows the business as well as anybody there. So Herb, thank you for being the most valuable player and filling in. And then last but not least, right to my left, Marguerite Bates-Frier, the Intermodal Regional Vice President of XPO Logistics, one of the world's top providers of transportation and logistics services. So I'll let you, Takashi, maybe take the lead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Takashi Masuda. I work for Ocean Network Express. We have our North American regional headquarters here in Richmond, Virginia. We are a container shipping company. We operate over 150 container vessels worldwide. Our operating capacity equals 1.5 million TEUs. That's equivalent of 20-foot containers. We carried over 5.7 million TEUs during the first half of 2018. And of that, over 2 million involves the Trans-Pacific trade, which is Asia to US, US to Asia, including Canada. And trade really means a lot to our company.
Thank you, John.
Takashi, thank you for coming to Virginia with your U.S. headquarters. We want to say that.
Right.
And if all of you look, you'll see these boxes that say ONE on it. That's magenta. That's the color of this line. So remember, those are magenta boxes when they come by. They're very beautiful. Hi, everybody. I'm John Reinhart. I'm the CEO, Executive Director of the Port of Virginia. My responsibilities are the Virginia Port Authority, our operating company, Virginia International Terminals, our chassis operations, which is HRCP2. We have a board of directors. Chairman Milliken is here. Commissioner Louisa Strahan's there. They're appointed by the governors. We have 13 commissioners. We meet every other month to chart the strategy and operation and review what we're doing across all aspects of the port. Interesting thing for Virginia is we have 6 facilities that we're responsible for, 4 deep water, 2 inland, and then we also have connections to other inland ports with the 2 major Class 1 railroads, Norfolk Southern and CSX. What we're trying to do is modernize and revolutionize the way this port operates. So that's the journey we're on. We've been successful thus far. We're growing year over year. We intend to continue to grow and outpace the market. We have a wonderful team. We have a really good program in place. And as we go through the discussions, I'll touch on some of the other things we're doing. We do have a dotted line up into the administration with the Secretary of Transportation. So we work very closely with the Secretary of Transportation. We are going to be going wider, deeper, safer. So all of that is underway, and we got great support from the legislature and the administration with $20 million for the preliminary engineering design now, and then going dredging as soon as January of 2020. It's not been done that fast anywhere else in the country. So the lights are on, and we're moving very quickly to energize and revolutionize your port.
I'm Cornelia Steinert, Senior Manager of International Trade with Canon, Virginia, Inc. We have been in Virginia about 30 years and depend very heavily on the wonderful work that John does and One Ocean Network as well. Big facility when you all are buzzing up and down 64 in Newport News. You can see us from the interstate. We manufacture toner cartridges in a foreign trade zone environment. We also do extensive camera repairs. If you've got a wonderful Canon camera and it needs to be repaired or cleaned, you send it off, it'll probably come to our facility. We also do a lot of repair and refurbishing work, as well as we also have a tool and die manufacturing company. So over the years, we have invested significantly in our plant, continuing to expand our production facilities and continuing to maintain modern automation. And we have some of those jobs that former Governor Allen was talking about, those manufacturing jobs, those high-tech jobs, those, we work very extensively with our workforce development to grow that talent to manage our manufacturing facilities. We import, we export, we consume a lot of domestic products, and we do a lot of in-house manufacturing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Frerichs and not Dick Willey, but I'm on the senior management team with Dick. Dick is responsible for AgriBusiness. I'm responsible for government relations and legal, and we get to work a lot together. And I'm lucky to be here today because I'm on the chamber board, one of my government relations benefits. And so Perdue is a 98-year-old family business located in Salisbury, Maryland. We have the foods and the agribusiness side, and we have significant operations in Virginia, and consider Virginia one of our more important states. We have a production facility in Accomack, further processing facility in Bridgewater, a big distribution center in Petersburg, and then our international gem on the agribusiness side in Chesapeake that we acquired from Cargill back in 2000. For international business, we export poultry out of Norfolk at the portside freezer, and corn and soybeans out of Chesapeake. And again, the governors were a great introduction because when they spoke about the poultry to China, that was ours. When they talked about the soybeans to Dandong, that was ours.
Herb, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Marguerite Frerichs. I'm the Regional Vice President for XPO Logistics. We are a top 10 global logistics provider with 32 physical assets in 32 countries, employing over 97,000 individuals. XPO has 12 locations in Virginia, making up brokerage facilities, LTL facilities, last mile facilities, and the Intermodal drayage facility, which I have led for the last 10 years, which is based in Norfolk, Virginia. We have a fleet of independent contractors who service the Port of Virginia day in and day out. And it's been interesting listening to everyone up here because our contractors service the Port of Virginia. We pick up we use his magenta boxes to pick up his soybeans to export out of the country. So I'm very happy to be here with you today.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for your investments, confidence, jobs, and all that in Virginia. It means a great deal. No longer secretary and operating now in a different environment, but there are some things that come back to me very easily, and knowing how you have plenty of places to make investments and locate your operations and hire people. So we really, really thank you for everything that you're doing in Virginia. All right, before I get into the questions, I only have a few questions, and that's by design, because we want this to be a little bit fun toward the end, where you will be submitting questions hopefully along the way. And I'm not sure if this is being put up on the screen or not, but I would ask everyone who has a question to email it to s.moore with 2 O's, M-O-O-R-E, at virginiachamber.com. Sam's going to get those questions from you, and at some point she will start transmitting them to me, and towards the end we will start taking some questions from the audience. I ask you to be clean, nothing nasty, civil, and we'll have some fun with that at the very, very end. So I'll remind you of that, and again, the email address is s.moore@virginiachamber.com. All right, the first question that I have for the panel, and I'm going to ask Takashi to go first with this because I think he's probably the most impacted. But how have the recent and substantive consolidations within the shipping industry impacted your respective businesses? And John, for you, your organization at the port, which is a big business after all. But Takashi, I think since you're a beneficiary of some of the consolidations in the shipping industry, I'd ask you to go first.
Thank you very much. So I started working in the shipping industry in 1989. The first consolidation was starting then, or actually a little bit before that, but I experienced my first merger in Japan. It was very small, just a couple of small Japanese companies, business operations merging, but it has not stopped. Actually, it's a very competitive market environment. It comes and goes in cycles. We've seen the largest maybe consolidation between 2015 and 2018. We had 18 shipping companies in 2015. We are now down to 10. And of the 18 shipping companies, only 3 operated more than 1 million TEUs back in 2015. Today, of the 10, 6 of them, of the shipping lines operate more than 1 million TEUs of ships. And actually, of the 6, 4 are more than 2 million to 3 million TEU in capacity, and the remaining 2 actually are 1.5 million. So the consolidation continues. It's necessary to compete in a environment where economies of scale are key. We can address operating costs, which is the port costs or the bunkering costs, through vessel sharing agreements, which necessarily does not require consolidation, but just partnerships. But to really address the overall financial costs, capital costs, the consolidation is necessary to compete. And I think we will continue to see more consolidation. It's not easy as we get bigger, but it's not, I think, the end of the road yet.
Takashi, thank you. Marguerite, maybe get you to answer the question from the shipping logistics standpoint.
So the recent acquisitions have been beneficial to us and our contractors because we are able to have more backhauls and triangulate freight. So now instead of having one ship line pass each other, when they've merged together, I have more of an opportunity to reload them, offer discounted rates, which is promising for customers. And so that's been beneficial. The consolidation and ship line alliances have been a bit more challenging. So when we have the mega ships show up, that has been difficult from the perspective that we're having more freight show up at one time. Customers are not used to having so much inventory at one time. We have a compressed free time schedule. So that is something that we're getting used to. Space for some of our customers has been a challenge where they are unable to accept maybe if they were having 10 containers come in on one vessel and 10 on another, now they have 20, so now having 20 on their property could be a challenge. So now we're pre-pulling boxes or pulling them to our yard and things of that nature. But as the port facility tends to grow, we'll be able to move those boxes even quicker to some of these individuals, and we're getting used to it. So there's been a challenge getting over the larger ships piece of it.
John, I'm going to ask you to go last. I think it'll be a good way to tie it all together since it all has to go in and out of your facilities. But
You're the moderator.
Herb, maybe address it from the agribusiness bulk shipping.
Okay,
stance.
Agribusiness, that's the Chesapeake facility, and we ship two different ways. Bulk, where they come alongside Chesapeake and we dump the grain into the bulk vessel and it sails off, and then we also load containers and bring them over to John's facility and ship them on containers. So there's been consolidation in both containers and the bulk, more on the container side, but we cannot pass all those costs on to our ultimate customers, especially recently. The last few years has been really good crops, so the price, there's been somewhat of a glut for corn and soybeans. So and then again with the consolidation, there has been a kind of an increase in ocean freight rates, so margin will get thinner, and that's not a preferable thing for us.
Right. Cornelia?
Well, it's been a bumpy year. I think we recognize when there are times of consolidation, you have growing pains. But we're really grateful, that One Ocean Network has retained their headquarters in Richmond. Simply because a lot of times, if there's a problem, the biggest problem is trying to get somebody on the phone. We depend on the schedules, we depend on the ships being on time. We love the bigger ships, but I have to admire. I know there have been a lot of challenges on the port congestion. Being able to have those containers be picked up and get them off the pier on a timely basis without getting stuck with demurrage and chassis charges. So, I think we recognize that there's growing pains. There are some concerns, about, from the shipper perspective, with this consolidation, will it really bring lower transportation costs to us as an importer and an exporter? And then, we have fewer ships coming in, that's got some benefits, but also, if there's port congestion and, the vessel is delayed and has to anchor, out in Cape Henry, for a week, and we're depending on that ship to come in because it contains some of our important production parts, it puts us in a real bad spot.
John, you want to pull it all together?
So back in the recession, there were multiple carriers, and there were some alliances back then. But this consolidation pace has just taken off since 2009. If we think about it as shippers or as those that supply the transportation or the carriers themselves, 3 alliances control 90% of the freight that comes in and out of the United States. 3 alliances. The top 10 lines control 90% of the freight coming in and out of this country. For survival, the consolidation is being done because they've got to get some financial return on their investments, reduce their operating costs, which means an acceleration of large ships, which Marguerite just touched on. So we're going down 5% a year in ship visits, but we're growing our business by 2 to 5% every year. So you're having larger discharges, you're having fewer port calls. Now from our port, think about it this way, we had individual contracts with every one of these carriers. So as O&E was created, we had 3 contracts that we had to merge into one. So we did it. It takes a lot of time to do the administrative stuff to make sure all of the operating agreements are set up. Virginia has an advantage over some of the other ports with this rapid consolidation because we control all of our facilities. So we can work with the carriers and move their ships around from one terminal to the next, because none of the carriers have a capital investment in this port, or they don't have to go deal with multiple operators to try to figure out how to get their ship calls in. So consolidation, what it means is that you have to have today's IT systems, you have to have a modern infrastructure, and you have to be ready to move with velocity so that Cornelia's freight can get in and out, or Marguerite can do multiple turns every day. So we have to collaborate more. But the consolidation is not over. And it is a threat to the country and to some of the shippers if you don't have good relationships, good IT infrastructure and interface, good partnerships with those carriers that will survive. So it's been a lot of extra work, Todd, to deal with it, but we've done it pretty well.
You have. Maybe just a quick follow-up. Is there anything brewing in the consolidation field right now that we may see in the next year?
There's always rumors, but I think right now a lot of it is going into the 3PL areas. The carriers are trying to do more vertical integration again now. They're trying to get into the supply chain in a way that they have walked away from for the last 10 years. So I see some of that being a continuation. I mean, blockchain initiatives going on with the carriers, trying to do more technology as a way they move information. There's a couple rumors of consolidation, but nothing that seems to be imminent.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right. Touching on, again, the uniqueness and uncertainty, in some cases confusion, around the current administration's approach to addressing trade agreements, trade issues between the U.S. and other countries. How has all that, including something I didn't touch on earlier, the escalating use of tariffs, impacted your business? John, in your case, the organization that is the Port of Virginia. How is the uniqueness of addressing these complex trade issues that sometimes, as Governor Allen mentioned, trying to negotiate at light speed, which I think the ambassador touched on, sometimes these things take years to evolve. So, Cornelia, maybe I'll ask you to go first. How has the Trump administration's approach to trade issues, trade negotiations impacted Canon?
Well, the ironic thing that me and my fellow international trade colleagues have been snickering about is, wow, hasn't international trade as a department really become elevated in everybody's companies? I mean, we've gotten to be really, really important resources all of a sudden. So, yeah, it's been a very, very challenging summer. We have been affected by all of it. Section 232 really caused us to really look at, what were we classifying and how are we classifying the articles. I know John Huddle spoke on this briefly yesterday, and if I talk too long, just go like this.
Got it.
So, and again, not to get too much into the weeds, but your tariff classification of your products, both on your import and your export side, is crucial. You can't just say, well, I think it's this and I'm going to go with it, or this is good because it avoids tariffs, because you could really put yourself into a huge point of liability and be subject to a lot of fines and penalties. We were fortunate in that we realized that we did have an error in a classification that ended up working to our benefit. So that the 232 ended up in an okay way for us. But the Section 301 tariffs, I mean, let's face it, as a country, imports and exports work together in a manufacturing environment. I wager to say most manufacturing companies are going to have some kind of imports, and traditionally, components, are relatively easy to be sourced from China. Especially some components that, aren't highly specialized and highly technical. Let's face it, screws and pins. We don't want to manufacture that kind of stuff in the United States anymore. It's just too tiny. Let China manufacture it. But now, we're in a position where, wow, we really need these small components for our manufacturing. We manufacture products with imported components that end up being made in the U.S. because of our foreign trade zone and because of all the U.S. components. So, it's kind of a shame that, some of those smaller components that we rely on, that we've been able to incorporate in our foreign trade zone environment to manufacture a U.S. product, we can no longer take advantage of the foreign trade zone, and now we're being subject to additional duties on it. So, we're looking at what we purchased from China. Fortunately, it's a very limited number of items. I mean, I've got some colleagues that, get really big components, and it's really causing a massive hurt on them. But it's still, we're spending a lot of time and energy on, something that we wish we didn't have to spend time on right now. We'd rather, focus on manufacturing and continuing to develop jobs and new products.
Thanks. Herb, you want to touch it from the agribusiness standpoint?
Yeah, again, Governor McAuliffe mentioned being in Iowa last weekend and the farmers and not getting their lines of credit renewed, and soybeans is a perfect example. At Perdue, we export 32% of our soybeans, and China brings in 32% of the soybeans and consumes 60% of the global soybean market. So when they put a tariff on there, it puts us at a 25% price disadvantage that we can't make up. So our agribusiness is being significantly impacted this year by the tariffs. And while we can find other markets, it takes so long to develop a market. As you know, the China market, we did a lot of work with both Governor McDonald and McAuliffe, trade missions, signing ceremonies, and so it takes a while to recreate that. So it's going to be a significant impact on our business.
Takashi.
Yes. So for the short-term or immediate situation, actually the tariffs have had a slightly positive impact to our business, which I think in the long term it's really not true, because as our customers struggle to understand the impact or making sure that they have products to provide for their customers, we have seen the traditional shipping season extended this year. We have usually, in order for Christmas sales season, a lot of our customers, import customers, ship products before November, and usually it starts to taper off. But we've seen that because of the Jan 1 tariff implementation, there is actually a longer shipping season that is continuing. Of course, we view this as just kind of a very short-term situation, and in really the long term, the uncertainty for trade is really not good for our industry. Of course, as the ships itself can be transferred to other ports or other countries or other trades, but the biggest consumer market is here in the United States, so we really would prefer to keep them operating in the United States.
I would mimic what Takashi has said here, that we have not been impacted that much from the tariffs that are going on now, because we did create an artificial peak where consumers and customers were nervous about what was going to happen. So they sped up inventory, they shipped early, we started seeing a peak in months that we typically would not have seen one, and as such, this peak has continued. We have certainly seen a reduction in U.S. scrap exports to China. That is something that we've seen a significant reduction in, because some of our customers would actually import and then reload containers with scrap cardboard, et cetera. We would export that, and that is a continuation of their green fence, and not necessarily a retaliation on the tariffs that has been ongoing, but there are stricter regulations on that commodity. So again, there are strong markets for that product, but nonetheless it takes a while to find another market to ship it. Other than that, we've been rather fortunate that we have not felt too much of an impact from this, given the driver shortage and the strong freight count moving through the Port of Virginia. We've been very fortunate that we're full steam ahead. We can't keep up. That's the general consensus from every trucker servicing the port. There's more freight than than individuals know what to do with right now. If we were talking about a tariff on automotive, I would have a different spin on that, because that would certainly hurt us, which is something that is in discussion now.
All right, we have 2 pros in the short term and 2 cons in the short term. John, you break the tie.
Well, I agree with what the comments both made by Takashi and Marguerite. We're a pretty balanced port. We do as much import as we do export. So having a free and fair trade is critical to the continuous growth across our port. We did see an early advance. We were growing at 8% plus in July and in August, because a lot of the shippers were trying to rush to get ahead of the 10% tariffs. Now, as Takashi just mentioned, we're seeing it stretch out now to January, because they're really saying, well, we know we got 10% now, but we'll have 25% in January 1 if it doesn't change. So we're seeing a real surge of volume today. We had a single case we had to go up and appeal to. Our port is in an infrastructure program. There are no ship-to-shore cranes built in the United States. We have 4 on order. Were ordered 18 months ago. They're 95% complete. They're going to load in China at the end of this month to come across for a January delivery. It would have hit us with an $11 million tariff if the 301 was not exempted. So we were successful in getting that exemption, not just for us, but for every port in the United States, because that critical infrastructure was needed to help us be competitive. So that's good news. The containers themselves were excluded, because all the containers are made in China. And they are not taxed or tariffed, because they're just a conveyance for trade. It's good news. But the chassis that all the containers moved on are not excluded. So a 25% tariff is going to hit all the chassis coming into this country to move freight. So you have ELDs, limiting driver availability, and you're going to have a $2,500 per chassis uptick in the price. So prices going down are not looking too good with the tariff impact.
I don't like the tax on the chassis. That's not good news.
It was appealed by a number of us, but
Right.
it just was not accepted. So what we have to do is hope the overall framework gets settled before the 25% hits. It really is hitting our agricultural community adversely here in the Commonwealth. So from the port, we're still moving, and we're actually moving a lot more, as Takashi mentioned, because of getting in front of the tariffs. Long term, it'll be really disruptive.
When the president kept the cranes out, how much money did that save the port?
11.1 million. So instead of paying for 5 and getting 4, we're paying for 4 and getting 4. And if we order some more, that will just help us. And on all the other 86 RMGs, those were coming out of Northern Europe. So, and we're 60% of the way done with those deliveries. They weren't subject to this tariff. And that was a $217 million purchase. And those will all be delivered by the early 2020.
And the tariff on the chassis is going to add significant cost if you all, we're always needing chassis in the port, because we depend on the chassis for the containers to get loaded on there so we can get them off the port. It's going to hinder the purchase of more chassis.
Yeah, we just have 1,000 more being delivered over the next 3 weeks.
Oh, man.
And so they're hit with a 10%. So it's not quite as aggressive.
Get them in before December.
We wanted to get them all in before January 1, and we were able to work with the pricing so it wasn't too adverse. But we'll have to get more next year.
And I want to make a comment about that. Just in my new role, where I'm gaining experience across the markets in the Northeast Midwest, chassis is something that is talked about quite often, and it's about the safety of the chassis. And the chassis pool in this market with HRCP, with these new chassis, there are facilities that have not added assets to their chassis pool in 6 years. And when you talk about CSA, you talk about safety, you talk about lights, you talk about maintenance, these chassis are turning constantly. And to have an option for safe, maintained equipment is critical, and that's not something that happens everywhere. And we are fortunate that, with these new assets coming in, that, it's just adding to the fleet, and it's very positive.
Yeah, and Marguerite, we've added 3,000 in the last 3.5 years. We're continuing to do it. So
it's fantastic.
Well, and I'm going to put that as a to be determined then, as far as what the uncertainty impact, because of the short-term benefits that you're getting now, obviously on the ag side, Canon, and what you've said. And John, I think it's obviously there's a lot looming there, but it's still to be determined. And it's probably just like everything else that we've had with the uncertainty of the last 2 years. I do think it's interesting. You mentioned, or I asked the question about the cost savings on the cranes alone. You had Ford last week before last, mentioned that because of the steel and aluminum tariffs, they're expecting an additional $1 billion in costs associated with that to them and the impact that that's going to have. So I think that we're all in a period of great uncertainty. And maybe this is a good follow-up question. If you could snap your fingers and you had the ability to walk into the White House right now, into the Oval Office, and I think the president's letting in a lot of people to the Oval Office these days. Sorry. So, if you had the ability to go into President Trump right now and ask him to implement one trade measure, that's all you get, don't ask for two, that would positively impact your business, your organization, John, what would it be and why? Marguerite.
So I'm going to veer off just a little bit. I believe that most leaders these days are thinking globally, and it appears that the United States is thinking more on a national level. And my request would not be for a trade measure. I would ask that we think about our relationships, because there are options. Customers have options, shippers have options, everyone has options. We're fortunate that we have what we have today, and it continues to come in. And if a change is made and a business goes somewhere else, another port, another country, it's very, very difficult to gain that back. And I would ask that we focus on our relationships and we think long-term and not immediate, and we do think globally about the impacts of citizens, countries, businesses, et cetera.
All right. Takashi?
I was listening to the governor's panel discussion, and I would really echo everything that they said. In one word, I think it's fair policy. So I don't think you can have subsidies or just support to enhance trade. I think tariff subsidies, they don't work. It's really creating an environment where the playing field is level, and that companies, including the shipping companies, are creative and innovative enough that we can continue to service customers and work together. That's, I think.
All right, so we got relationships. Think about that. And fairness. That's what you would ask for. Cornelia, what would Canon ask for?
We are going to ask that there be the foreign trade zone exemption. Foreign trade zones, manufacturing foreign trade zones are involved in a lot of industries and create tons of jobs. We make pumps in foreign trade zones. We make car components in foreign trade zones. We make forklifts in foreign trade zones. We make toner cartridges in foreign trade zones. Foreign trade zones have been set up to level the playing field with foreign manufacturers by allowing foreign manufacturers to make U.S. products to compete globally. And, and it's really upsetting. I mean, I understand, the rationale behind the tariffs, but you've got foreign trade zones that are set up to be able to import raw materials, save the duty, and manufacture a finished good. By not having foreign trade zones, existing foreign trade zones that are already supporting U.S. jobs, by not having that exemption for Section 301, I think is very unfortunate.
Okay. Herb? One request of the president.
Well, it's pretty easy for us. Make soybeans great again. And, remove agricultural commodities from the trade war. I mean, that's how people eat. And farmers vote. They're going to lose a lot of money this year, and there's no win in that trade war. So.
All right, got to change the hats from MAGA to MSGA. Make soybeans great again. John, bring it all together for us.
Please stop tweeting. No. We really have to recognize China has been egregious in their violations of technology transfer and how they've dealt with the United States. But what we want to do is have fair and free trade. And we don't want to take a blunt instrument to something that needs to be dealt with more surgically. So I think we do have to get back to, we are part of the global community. How do we open the doors for fair and free trade without going with overarching tariffs that are hurting our country and making us less competitive? Because we had a tax bill through. We've got some deregulation that has happened. A lot of things to stimulate growth of business in the United States. This is counterintuitive, the way these tariffs are being applied.
All right. I'm going to start working on trying to get each and every one of you in front of the President in the White House here in the coming weeks. Stay tuned for that. Let me remind everyone again, questions, go to s.moore@virginiachamber.com, s.moore@virginiachamber.com. I checked a few moments ago. We got some real doozies coming in, so looking forward to that. John, you've been going last this morning by design, because I think it's good for you to wrap it up and from the private sector standpoint, and then coming back around to the port. I thought you were getting ready to say something. Go ahead. No? All right.
I'm good with it.
Given the ever-increasing size of the shipping vessels, these post-Panamax monsters that I've had the fortune to go on with you back in, I guess, May when we welcomed the Costco development, at the time was the largest ever. All the technology changes, cybersecurity, terrorism threats, everything that's going on out there, a finite amount of resources and manpower. But with the recognition that despite the challenges, the port has to continue to grow and continue to be profitable. So with all the backdrop of those challenges, we realize there are opportunities. What is the Port of Virginia doing to plan and prepare for the future and all the prosperity that I think everybody in this room believes is there?
Thank you. It's a great question. I think we have to go back. We started an investment strategy a number of years ago, and we put $150 million into repairing some of our assets, opening up some new gates with a $42 million new gate system a year ago in June. And we went on a $700 million plan, supported by the legislature and the administration and our board, to modernize two facilities at once. So as we sit here today, the $320 million at a 500,000 container capacity at Virginia International Gateway, it's almost done. And it will be done by June of 19. And part of that is increasing the berth, increasing the crane heights and size, doubling our rail connectivity on dock. That will all be done. And concurrently, we're doing the same thing, adding 30 semi-automated stacks to NIT, which adds 400,000 plus container capacity to that facility. Now, what we're doing is we're doing the infrastructure side. We also now are moving forward on the dredging with a wider, deeper, safer. So we're rolling out new technology systems. What we're trying to do is be a state-of-the-art terminal that can receive the largest ships that want to call the East Coast of the United States, hopefully first and hopefully last, because of the natural advantages we put in place, that we can move the freight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because of our IT systems and our semi-automation, that we're safer when we operate so no one gets hurt. We widen the channels so we have the two-way traffic the governor spoke of, so that they don't have to wait out and we don't have a 4-hour one-way traffic restriction when we're bringing in the ultra-large container ships. Because I don't know if you all know, our neighbor next door is the largest Navy yard in the world, and they really don't look upon it too favorably if you say you can't leave for 4 hours or you can't come in for 4 hours. So we need to do this not only for national defense, but also for the commercial advantages. So it's a multi-faceted approach, and there's no other port in the United States doing this much at one time. Right. So what we're really trying to do is make Virginia a global gateway. The port is a global gateway for Virginia, and we are a catalyst for commerce all across the Commonwealth.
Maybe along the same lines or the theme that from the previous question, where you had the ability to go into the White House and ask the president for one request to implement, flip it around to the other 4 panelists. If you and your respective companies had the ability to go in front of John, which you're doing today, so consider that John Milliken's here too from the board, so John, ears open here, get ready. But if you had the ability to ask him and he could grant the request, money's not an issue, manpower's not an issue, what would that one request be to help grow your business, and why would you ask for it? Because with the impact on the positive side for your business. Takashi, you want to go?
Okay. Yes.
Take notes.
Take notes, John. Milliken, yes. You too. He's got his pen out.
We operate ships And we really appreciate all the investment that the port is making on the terminal. Of course, the operational aspect, the draft, the cranes, to be able to handle the large ships with the speed is important. But if there's one thing for us at the end of the day, shipping is still a very much people's business. There's always going to be one container buried somewhere in that stack that needs to be dug out and hurried. And the only way we can do that is not through automation, but is through relationships. And so I would ask just a good relationship.
Good relationships.
Thank you.
Takashi, thank you. Cornelia, would Canon make one request of John in the port?
Well, I was going to say, truth be told, I know you hear from us a lot.
We always look forward to
We
it.
don't hold back a whole lot, do we? Sorry. It's really all about us.
We
right?
like, it is.
So this is not a good question for you? This has already been asked?
He's already been
Okay.
asked. So, well, we are grateful because some of our problems you're already working on. The congestion in the port, having ships that can't come in. Big problem for us, shortening the transit time. Why do those ships have to stop at Jacksonville anyway? Can't they just come to, the first place they should stop would be Hampton Roads.
So you got that, Takashi? We just come here first.
We need to shorten, we have, over the years, more and more, moved more of our transportation to be all water to come directly into the Port of Hampton Roads. We love the relationships we have here with you all, and your staff, the customer service people are phenomenal. I know Friday, 4 o'clock, they're already thinking, Canon's going to be calling because ship's coming in on the weekend, and we need our containers out first thing Monday morning.
Right.
So, the transit time, fewer stops, would be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Herb, one thing from the agribusiness community.
And I had, this is the one question I actually had to get input from, because the other ones I could answer. But, and again, we're thankful for the, remain competitive, and we're thankful for the wider, deeper, safer, because the bigger the vessels get, they got to get in there. But it's similar. It's congestion, and it's a congestion on the land. It's, as I said, we load a lot of containers in Chesapeake and put them on a truck to get them to the port. And sometimes a truck driver can get back and forth only once in a day. We're lucky if you can do it twice. And the amount of corn is the same, or soybeans, but back and forth in days, that's expensive. So it's congestion on in and out of the port.
Yeah.
Marguerite?
As a motor carrier, certainly my request has to center around truck capacity. So I look out here and I see so many of my friends that work for the economic development, Holly and Daniel and Kara that work for the port, and individuals, Russ, people that are out there selling, and the governor's listening to them, and everyone that is bringing all this business in, which is phenomenal, and it is here. And we need drivers to haul this freight to our customers. Yeah. And so I think that I would ask that we continue what you've been doing, which is reinvesting with a long-term view back into the terminal for infrastructure that is allowing us to move quicker through the terminals. And I believe that there's so many, again, even just Ashley McLeod with the VMA and the voice that the motor carrier community, the transportation community has in Virginia is by far the best that I've seen anywhere. Everyone, Mr. Milliken works with truckers, with motor carriers, meets with people, listens to them. There are so many moving parts to that where the ILA works together and the truckers work together and the shippers work together, and there's motor carrier committee meetings. There's so many, inland transportation committees, so many groups that come together with various stakeholders that discuss challenges and, most importantly, are trying to reach solutions. And it's phenomenal. And I see the improvement, and a lot of that, it's not instant, it's not overnight. Just because we bring something up today and we agree on a solution, it doesn't happen the next day. These things take months, sometimes years, to bring certain pieces of equipment in or get things going. But the transformation that we've seen at VIG with doubling the capacity with the 16, could not be more excited. So I would just say continue to do what you're doing, listening to everyone, engaging, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, John, you want to respond to any of that since you were?
If I could.
Yes, please.
First of all, your wishes by us building the infrastructure is going to help induce our carriers to want to bring the larger ships in and reduce some of the secondary port calls. That's part of the whole strategy, because the larger ships are only going to call maybe 3 ports, where now they're calling 5 and 6. So that's going to be that's part of the infrastructure play that we're making. As far as with the motor carriers, the focus on all of our technology with reservation systems, the Navis N4, the number of gates and the truck positions that we have with these new stacks are going to just continue to accelerate the turn times. I mean, Marguerite, you use the TRS, and your drivers are even self-directing themselves, and I appreciate you doing that. But they're finding a benefit to that, where they're coming in and getting half the time as far as the service. But if everyone wants to wait till 11 o'clock to 4 o'clock and do all of their moves in that 1 hour, in that one period when there's not reservations, it's hard to plan for that. And what we're trying to do is help meter the flows so that everyone gets better service. And we're going to continue that effort. If you think about NIT, 150 truck positions on the south side for truck deliveries when we're done. Going to 140 truck positions at VIG as we finish up, and that'll happen in January. So all of our focus is to make sure that we can move that freight. We don't want the motor carrier to be spending time on our terminal. We want them in, we want them out safely. So we're going to focus our efforts on what you're asking for.
Well, as large as XPO is, we have roughly 42 intermodal drayage facilities across the country. And for XPO, our Norfolk facility is the largest by far, with just shy of 200 contractors. So this is our largest facility, and I'm extremely competitive. So please keep doing what you're doing so we can continue to grow and we can hold that record. So thank you.
Well, you also help guide our efforts. You know, when you with that collaboration, when we're talking, we try to respond to the efforts that you say make a difference. So keep helping us.
Somehow it doesn't surprise me that a request to a state agency comes down to money and manpower, there's relationships, moving things faster. I think that's probably the case throughout all of private sector work with the state agencies and probably the federal government as well. So no surprise, but thank you. Those are really good answers to the question. And I know John will be working with Governor Northam and the General Assembly to have all these requests honored in the next budget cycle. So no pressure, John, and John Milliken as well. All right, here are questions from the audience. And again, there's several that have just come in, so I'm just sort of picking and choosing here. No favoritism, nothing. I am trying to get questions that will the whole panel can touch on. So even though there's a couple of really, really good ones that have come in, they're very specific, and if we have time, we might get to those. But we've talked a lot about the uncertainty from the Trump administration on trade policy and negotiations and other issues. We've talked a lot about the impact of the trade war that's going on and the tariffs. And John, you referenced the money that you didn't have to spend on the cranes. We talked about these chassis. I mentioned Ford and the $1 billion that they cited. What are we seeing now? What's going on now that is already affecting our day-to-day lives? I know I'm looking at doing a renovation and expansion of my house, and the contractor told me that if we had done this a year ago, it would be $25,000 to $30,000 less because of all the impact of tariffs and trade. So Herb, I know you'll maybe get you specifically on food prices, but everybody else, what are we seeing? What's the first thing we're going to see if we haven't already seen it as far as the price impact? And Marguerite, why don't you go first if you...
Well, just dray rates, I mean, truck driver rates.
Truck rates,
so,
yep.
The driver shortage, this has been going on for years. You can read it every single day in the JOC. It's, customers are experiencing that because it's difficult to find truckers to haul freight. I mean, you cannot, that's why if you can only turn one a day, you need 2 drivers to turn 2 instead of 1 turning 2. It's very difficult. And we've seen a slight uptick in that, and it's primarily based off the increases to the truck. So we've seen increased hiring, leasing of independent contractors, owner-operators, hiring truck drivers, and the only reason that people are getting back into this business is because the rates are going up. So if that starts to tick back down, you're going to wind up losing these individuals. If there's a slip back with congestion, you'll lose individuals. These guys need to make money, and if they're not, then they're going to go get their own authority, they're going to haul a flatbed, they're going to do something domestic that they can look at a day and say, I can get from here to here in a certain amount of time, and this is the money I'm going to make. So, the average age of a contractor today is roughly 55 years old. You look at your kids, you look at your grandkids, people aren't telling them, go be a truck driver. And again, you have to have truck drivers to move this freight. So we need to have truck drivers. We have to get creative on schooling and different ways to go about it. And some of these things are being talked about, and it's working, but we've got to continue full force ahead. We cannot go backwards.
Herb, you want to talk about it from the agribusiness and specifically food prices?
Well, and actually, at least in the short term, until you have, unfortunately, farms going out of business or farmers doing something else with their land, there's a glut of grain on the market, so the food prices, there's actually that and a lot of protein on the market, the prices are somewhat down, which is, good for a consumer, but bad for a food company. So, but in the long term, then it may settle out as farmers sell land for development or do something else with their land, and there'll be less. But hopefully there'll be a change before that happens.
Cornelia? You want to
Sorry.
Go? Yeah, it's all right.
Sorry.
Sorry, still thinking.
So, if we were to import a toner cartridge from Japan, from Vietnam, from the Philippines, 0% duty. As a company, we compete for production with companies that manufacture very similar products all over the U.S. at 0% duty. So having some of these tariffs assessed on our raw materials, it's raising our production costs. It's putting us at a disadvantage with our sister companies overseas. So, continuing this, I really see that, jobs are going to be affected. And I think, consumers, ultimately, if, production costs go up, how are we going to meet our bottom line? Ultimately, those production costs have to be passed on to consumers. So I read an article about Coca-Cola Company, love my Diet Cokes, but, Cokes and other canned products, they're cans. It's steel and aluminum. Those prices are raising. Their production costs are going to be raised, and it's going to have to be passed on.
Takashi.
I'm not sure if it's directly related to tariffs, but today it's maybe more geopolitical, but bunker or crude oil price really impacts our industry. Average ship burns over 100 tons of bunker a day, and the cost of crude directly relates to the bunker that we burn, and this is having a big impact to the cost that we can provide transportation to our customers.
You throw in the uncertainty in the Middle East, it makes it even more so.
But Takashi, what about January 1 of 2020? What's going to
I was just going to
happen?
ask that question. Good.
Right. Yes, this is another, actually, it's a cost of protecting the environment. The International Maritime Organization and globally we have agreed to burn fuel that is with less sulfur content. I think today many ports or many coastal regions require ships to burn fine fuel that does not emit CO2 or sulfur. But because that's a mentality of not in my backyard, you don't want to see ships emitting black smoke. But once out in the ocean, people do not see this. So there is a difference in the fuel that we burn today, coastal versus ocean. And 2020, the rules will change that we will be, or shipping companies will be required to use fuel that is with less sulfur content for the entire voyage. Then the cost of course, a cleaner fuel, this will be a higher. It's like burning not regular but premium high-octane gasoline. If you go to the pump at the gasoline station, there's a price differential very similar to that concept.
John, you want to wrap it up?
Yes, sir. It'll almost double the price of fuel for the ocean carriers on 2020. They'll have to go to LNG, they'll have to go to 5% low sulfur diesel, they'll have to put scrubbers on. So you're going to see a doubling, which is going to be more pressure to go to larger ships, slow steam, fewer port calls, because they just want to get their cost of fuel spread across the vessel a little more efficiently. Unfortunately, the tariffs and all of the risk and the lack of predictability is a threat to the economy. I mean, we're living in a very robust economy right now, and a lot of things have been done are helping our economy go in the right direction. But if we go into January 1, 2019 and have a 25% tariff, it's going to just start to meter down this economy. It's going to hurt the agricultural community. It's going to reduce employment. There's going to be some real adverse impacts, which then could start the inflation peak going up again. So I think we have to look at it more holistically. And I'm concerned about the economy in 2019 and 2020 if these tariffs continue this way, because that's when it's going to come home to roost. It hasn't yet.
It hasn't yet.
It hasn't yet, but it will more after the first of the year.
Barry, we got time for one more question, maybe? One more question. I'm going to bring this one in because all three of the governors this morning touched on it, and it's transportation. And someone submitted a question that said, how do the current conditions of Virginia's major interstates, 95, 81, and 64, help or hamper your business right now? And John, thinking about from the standpoint of your role at the port, help or hamper right now? Herb, you want to go?
Well, I can be, especially on the ag side, it's not a significant, except for the local congestion. The major highways are not an issue, and we take advantage of the water. Most of our grain elevators are located on the water, Tappahannock, Kilmarnock, you name it. We barge things in and out of Chesapeake, up to Salisbury, up to Delaware. We try to avoid the roads.
Right. Marguerite?
I'd say it's hurting.
Hurting?
Locally, it's fair, but we're going beyond locally. We're going, Delaware, West Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, and it hurts. And another thing to bring up even with the infrastructure is the hours of service, and contractors pulled over on sides of roads waiting for their hours of service to reset, and no places for parking and things of that nature. So there's definitely some work to be done, bridges, tunnels, et cetera.
Cornelia?
Well, we have traditionally struggled with traffic and transportation. I mean, I would, like to voice my appreciation to the BMA and to HRTPO for the work that they've done and that we have done, collectively as a region. I think, focusing on our transportation needs regionally and from a cohesive state-wide effort is slowly making differences. Our biggest concern, of course, is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. We are conveniently located right off of 64. If we've got empty boxes to turn into NIT, or we've got full containers to pick up at NIT, the most direct route is going to be the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. If we're coming in and out of VIG, of course, we can take advantage of the Monitor Merrimack. But I think, I know there is, I believe the expansion of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel has already been funded. Am I correct in that?
It's in the HR Tech funding, and they're moving forward with it.
So I think, we are slowly moving to, addressing our transportation needs, but they're, definitely very serious concerns. And again, I'm grateful for all the efforts that have, been done to make them a priority and to get the funding to get them done.
Takashi.
Okay. I don't want to be too irresponsible, but we are
Your boat, right?
transporting containers on the ocean. So really the road or water inland in the U.S. Is not, I shouldn't say our major concern.
Right.
But we have these great partners, the gatekeepers, the physical truckers or the companies that transport the containers beyond the port.
Right.
And the velocity in which this moves really impacts our business because, as John's been mentioning, one ship makes one port call, it discharges 4,000 containers. And just the number of cranes that are required to discharge these containers, it impacts the number of days that the ship needs to stay in the port.
Right.
And if there's congestion on the dock or getting out the gate, this impacts the velocity that the containers are discharged or loaded back. So really, we call the hinterland connections are quite important in the selection of gateway.
John, current state, interstates?
Well, I
Helping.
want to go back to what the governor said. If you look at what we've done with transportation policy over the last number of years, it has gotten stronger. We've created the HR TAC and the HR TPO and a funding mechanism so they make regional decisions on how to go forward with transportation. Northern Virginia has that same approach. You take smart scale and you start to look across the state and say, how do we do the evaluations of road improvements? So a lot of things over the last 4 years or so have moved us in the right direction, and we're starting to see it. Look at 64, it's coming along. So we're getting some of it in place, but it was long overdue.
Right.
So we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. I was going to ask the rapid fire question. Better today than 10 years ago?
Yes.
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 Yes?
Good. George Allen, Bob McDonald, and Terry McAuliffe will be happy, and everybody else in that time frame. I know Barry's probably going to do this as well, but let's give our panelists a very, very big round of applause and thanks.